The world is saved. The living room's dark, save for light being cast from the big TV screen and the imminent sunrise that's teasing the one starry sky with whispers of morning.
Hey, George.
Hey, Lions, how's it going?
Dude, it's going educationally.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I read a book about game design.
You
And-
had me at reading a book, man. Like, I don't do
okay.
that.
We're done. Episode over.
Yeah. The curtain falls.
I read a book called, hang on, it's A Theory of Fun for Game Design. And before I tell you why I think it's worth reading, I will say this is a tough read. So I will put a link in the show notes. If anybody wants to read it, I got it from the library. It's interesting, but it is a really tough read. But here is the nugget that made me say, like, I'm glad I read this, because even though there's a lot of industry jargon and a lot of like technical, psychological framing of the problem, this was the metaphor that got me, because I was like, oh, I will use this in my life when I talk to people about games. So there's a section where he is trying to disentangle the like systems of a game, like the actual mechanics, you know, the math that makes the game happen, from the set dressing of the game. Because the point he is ultimately trying to make in this section is it is disingenuous to say that the set dressing doesn't count, right? Like, people who understand game mechanics will often say, like, oh, but the game's not really about that. It's a match 3 game. It's a whatever, right? So like, it's like, right, it is, but also on the face of it, it's something abhorrent, right? And so the example that he gives, and this book is like prose on the left and then like little comic on the right. So there's an illustration to go along with this example. Imagine a game about mass murder where you are throwing your victims into a well and then trying to gas them before they can climb on each other and escape, right? If you throw enough of them into the well and pack them tightly enough, they can't get out and they die. But if they are able to like form a human pyramid, they can climb out and like take you on and you lose, right? That sounds pretty horrible, but mechanically, do you know what that game is?
Tetris?
It's Tetris. And he shows, like, here's an illustration. I mean, it's all like stick figures, but it's like, here's the well and like the little stick people going in and they're climbing on each other. And then in the next page, he just draws the shapes around them. Like, here's the guy who's like down squatting with his arms over his head. So he makes the little box. And here's the guy who's like standing up tall and trying to help somebody get out. So like, he's the line piece. And it's like, right. But no one could reasonably argue that the game about mass murder would have the same broad popularity as Tetris does, even though mechanically they're identical. They just have different set dressing. And I was like, it's an over the top, like hyper visceral metaphor. But I was like, that's
It's
good.
meant to be. Yeah.
It's meant to be. And for someone who has never thought about game design, I was like, that's the kind of thing that would make them go, well, but no, those would be different games. And it's like, right. How would they be different? It's not the mechanics. So we have to talk about these things together, because you can't just say that the mechanics are all that matter. And you can't say the set dressing is all that matters, because obviously their interplay is what actually like makes the game happen. So it's called A Theory of Fun for Game Design. I will link to it in the show notes. It is a very tough read, because it's like, it is literally hard to read because of the way he writes, but there's some really interesting stuff in there.
So that actually ties very nicely into my topic for this week. So we'll have to address my topic, because that one of the things I was doing and working with a lot this week fundamentally changed some of the ways that I play a game that I play a lot. And I was just like, this is only possible because of this new tool that I'm using. If not for that new tool, these designs that I'm doing would be undoable, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and again, like the literally the core rule set that I'm using is exactly the same. So yes, and we plan that in advance, you know,
Yeah, totally,
and,
100%.
Yep, because we're good professionals.
So we got to do some shilling now. If you're interested in games about no, that doesn't sound right. If you're interested in not games about mass
it's
murder,
Jesus' Death Army. Wait, something I just said doesn't sound right.
Yeah, if you're interested in Jesus' Death Army, you can subscribe to the show to support us. You can leave ratings and reviews on the iTunes or Apple Podcasts. But if you want to go above and beyond, you can support us on the Patreon. And if you support us at any level, you get the after show, which is just like, it's more show. Sometimes it's games, sometimes it's other stuff, but there's just more stuff that you can get that nobody else gets. And if you go super crazy and you support us at a high enough level, we will actually shout you out on the show. So with that, I need to thank first our 4-bit portables, David, Frederick, Jacob, Joshua, Keith, Martin, and our 8-bit classics, Yarno, Jay Brent, John, and Kevin, and our 16-bit hero, Michael.
And for $1,000, we will spend up to 4 hours reading a book of your choice.
To them? Or like we will just read the book?
We will just read it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. I had to put an upper cap on the time on that.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I don't know, somebody could have us read something pretty awful. But I mean, even if it's a terrible book, it's 4 hours, that's $125 an hour. I've spent my time doing worse things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like people, lazy $1,000 patrons would go right to the like, oh, I'm like Mein Kampf, like something abhorrent that some terrible person wrote. And it's like, yeah, but there's historical value to that because like we're having kind of a push of right-wing people and like knowing how they think might actually have some utility so that you could try to prevent them from seizing power again. I'd be afraid of someone finding like the worst, most personal like cookbook blog turned published book ever, where it's just boring. There's no evil to defeat. There's nothing valuable to get out of it. It's just like, I remember when my grandmother told me why salted butter was the worst and I should only use unsalted. It's just like,
Yeah. No, I mean, because the nice thing is that for 4 hours, I think that, and actually this gets a little philosophical. I believe that this is kind of why the whole like don't burn books is a thing, because like as we were just talking about earlier, sometimes the purpose of somebody's life is to serve as a cautionary tale for others. I mean, like, even if a book is terrible, there are things to learn from it, which is how to not write a terrible book. It's like, so I think that if we set the time limit at 4 hours, even if it is the most boring cooking blog, like having somebody pay me to sit down and read it might be like, okay, why was this the worst thing I could ever read? Yeah, and who knows? Like somebody might just spend $1,000 to be like, hey, this is I think an underappreciated classic, and I want you guys to read it.
Yeah.
Like we always go to like what could go terribly wrong, but sometimes things could go right.
They could go terribly right. All right. We do have, of course, a mailbag question because it's Nostalgia Goggles, and this question I'm projecting a little bit onto the person who asked what I think it is they're getting at. And so I think what will come out of that is an interesting conversation. If I am misrepresenting what their intention was, I'm sorry, I guess.
You are sorry. Now apologize.
Oh, so the question is, what is a game you are satisfied or happy that you own and why? And the reason I think that this is an interesting question is because between when we were first playing video games as youths and today, the definition of ownership has really gone sideways, right? Mm-hmm. So for most people who play classic games, especially, ownership means like I own the game, right? I own the gold Zelda cartridge, right? Like that's a thing. Somebody would probably even buy a broken one on eBay so they could like frame it so that people know I own the gold Zelda cartridge, but then they also keep it in like their airtight, like safe under their bed or in a secret compartment in the wall, because owning that physical object is what matters. And what we have shifted toward as a society is having access to the thing, right? Because the thing is the game, right? And a lot of people in the modern era don't even have physical copies of their games at all. The vast majority of the games that I own are not physical copies. They are digital copies. And the problem with that is I don't actually own them, right? I have a license to use them. But if Steam or Good Old Games or the Epic Game Store or the PlayStation Store or Xbox Live or whatever like Nintendo Online service you use, if they decide, oh, we're not going to publish this game anymore, or we don't have the rights to, someone else is taking it away and you didn't even know that was like a thing that could happen, you lose access to that game. So what I will say is the games that I am, the physical object that I'm the proudest to own, which is what I think this question is literally getting at, is I have my original copy of Final Fantasy VII for the PS1 that I've told the Christmas story about, and like I still have that game. I still have my original copy of Final Fantasy Tactics, which is unreal that disc continues to spin. And then after combining that with Susan's games that she had, I actually have an original copy of Final Fantasy VIII, which is horrible and I hate it, but it completes the trinity of PS1 games. And I also have Final Fantasy IX, right? So like games that were incredibly like formative in my development. Like I have physical copies of those, but do I ever put them into a PlayStation to play them? No, I don't. When I played Final Fantasy VIII last year or 2 years ago or whatever, like I played the remaster on Steam. The last time I played Final Fantasy VII, I played an emulated copy because it was more convenient for me, right? The last time I played Final Fantasy IX, I played an emulated copy because it was more convenient for me. So the thing that I'm actually proudest of is that the games that I care the most about, that I have a means to do this with, I have liberated from their DRM like BS hellscape, and I have copies of them. I don't necessarily have the gold cartridge, but like games that I own digitally, I have made sure I have access to in a more permanent way than the license would technically grant me to. And there's a lot. I am probably on the wrong side of the law with that, and I don't care. I don't actually care, because it, to me, like that is the principle of the thing, is like I paid for this. This is mine now, right? And I may not have access to the servers and to DLC and to updates and all that crap forever if it's a modern game. But if it's a retro game and I paid money for it and then like my cartridge broke or something, like too bad. That's mine. I paid for it. And if that means I have to get a ROM and put it on a hard drive, like tough crap, that's mine. So that's Final Fantasy VII is like the legally friendly, non-dubious answer. And all the stuff that I like took back from the iron grip of capitalism is the true answer.
Yeah, for me, I when I looked at this, I as famously don't care as much about licensing as you do. I don't think that it's because your outrage is like more or less like justified or whatever. I just think I'm not as educated to be that frustrated by it. Like you know a lot more about the tech industry and know a lot more about this sort of stuff, and you're kind of like, you know that this person has a gun to your head, right? And I'm like, I don't know, I can't see the gun, so like, sure. I believe you, and I believe that your outrage is justified, but I can't see it. So, so I say all that to say that, so the weird thing is that when I thought about this, I don't have that. So for physical copy, I'll get to that in a second, because there is something that I'm proud to own, a game that I'm proud to own physically. But as far as if you include owning digitally, as in owning digital copies, I actually weirdly don't have that feeling with video games. I do with movies and TV, though, which is weird, right?
Oh, so you have like the box set of some show and you're like, yeah, I've got the box set of that show. Interesting.
Well, because like what I'll do is because when it comes to like, for example, do you want to rent this on Amazon or do you want to buy it? I'll be like, I want to own a copy of this. Or like, oh, this is for free on Netflix. I'm like, right, but I want, even if it is a digital copy, like I want to own a copy of it. And the one that I am most proud of is seasons 2 through 7 of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yeah, and that to me smacks of replayability, right? Like,
yes,
when it comes time to spend dollars, there is a part of you that is highly confident you will rewatch seasons 2 through 7 of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and that part does not exist when you are buying a game. You're not like, oh, I'm going to play this for years and years.
Yeah, because I don't know, like I might play it and then never think about it again. But especially for like Star Trek, I'm like, whenever I want to watch Star Trek, I want that on tap. Like I don't want to like think about like, oh, well, who's streaming it now? And oh, well, Netflix drops it. Do I have Paramount Plus right now? No. When Teddy says to me, I might be in the mood to watch Star Trek, I want to be like, behold, all of the Star Trek, all of the meaningful Star Trek. Where do you wish your journey to begin, son? Like that's what I want. So, but when you brought up the physical copy, it made me think there is one game that I am proud to own physically, and you have a copy of it too. But it is as we were talking about earlier, is that rarity breeds like things that are more expensive are typically rarer. Dungeons and Drinking. I own a copy of that game, and only a very, very small handful of people own a copy of that game because I made it. I made it from scratch. I did all of the artwork myself. There's not much artwork, but I did it myself. It's playable. I have tons of fond memories behind it. I own it, and yeah. So Dungeons and Drinking.
Yeah. No, that's legit. I actually wasn't even thinking about like board games, because obviously, video games, but I would not be surprised if like that community, those people are even more about it, because the digital version of a board game is different from the digital version or the physical version of a board game in really significant ways. Whereas the digital version of a video game versus the, big air quotes physical version of the video game is more like, well, it's about the licensing and access and stuff. But like, once you push a cartridge into your console and you sit back and hold the controller, it's not really honest to say like, well, this is different than the digital version. It's like, no, like once you pressed, power on the console, like the experience was pretty functionally identical. Yes, there are, please don't at me, but like for the most part, it's basically the exact same experience. So, but with a board game, like if you have a beautiful, like hand carved chess set, that's not the same thing as playing chess on your iPhone. It's just not.
Right. Yeah. It's like a physical book versus a digital book, which actually also links into my subject for the day. This is going really well for me. Also, though, like I will say that that made me think of the one other game that I made that was never going to be, because I made Dungeons and Drinking with the idea that I could eventually sell it. Right. I never did. I probably never will. But, like it's fun. I like it. All sorts of stuff. If people really want to see it, add us in the show and I might dig it up and try to do that again. But I do remember the game that it was its predecessor, which was Dragon Ball Abridged Drink, which is basically a drinking game that was just reskinned to be Dragon Ball Z in a card game. I remember that game also very fondly because I have a lot of fond memories and fond not memories of playing that game. But is it one of the things that happened, and I'll let you tell it, was when a friend of yours came over to your house for the first time and like pulled out like all of your, card games and stuff, and didn't he see you might not remember. I remember this story when you told it to me.
I think I know which one you're talking about, because people have actually stumbled upon board games more than once and been like, what the hell is this? But the one I think you're talking about, because we had just redone some of the furniture in my living room. So like all of my board games had been like shoved into boxes and now they could like be up on the shelf. Right. And so all of the video games were on the top part of the shelf and all the like board games are on the bottom part of the shelf. And he was just like combing through to see what was on display, right? Because this is why you want to own the physical object. So someone can look and say like, I see you read Dickens. I too read Dickens, right? It's like, oh, I see you're a fan of Final Fantasy. I'm also a fan, right? It's that kind of thing. So he was going through and he got to the DBZ version of that. And he's a big like manga nerd and he plays a lot of games, and he picked it up and he was like, is this a drinking card game, but like Dungeons or Dragon Ball Z themed? And I was like, yes, it is. My friend made it. And he was like, I need to meet this friend. I was like, okay, good. Because that could have been like, well, I gotta go because I'm afraid you're gonna like chop me up and eat me.
So is this a drinking themed Dragon Ball Z game? Yes, it is. Can we play it? Yeah. That was like, you have those little moments with people where you're like, we're either about to become better friends or worse friends. Like this is an inflection point. But all of that being said, none of that matters, because what matters is what are you playing and why should I care?
So I've been playing Final Fantasy 16, the single player action focused one. It came out in summer and I've been playing it real slow like. Because at first I was like, okay, I'm not going to play this until I have time to like sit down and play the whole thing. And then I was like, that time is not coming because I'm an adult with a job and children and hobbies. And I was like, I'm not going to have like a 50-hour block, right? So I'm going to just play a little bit and just play a little bit, right? Which for an action game is helpful in some ways, because then like you're never too far from the controls. Like you kind of, you play and then you sleep on it, and then like a couple days later you play for another hour or two. So like that was actually kind of helpful. And later I would like to have a conversation about like slow gaming, like drawing something out on purpose. But probably not this episode, because I want to know how all these weird threads of yours connect. But I finished the game just yesterday, and I am like super satisfied with it. Like it was, it ended up taking me about 52 hours. Like I damn near 100% the first playthrough, because there's a new game plus and some stuff is only available in the new game plus. So like for a first playthrough, I did everything that I know of that you could do. And it's a really tight game in like the way the mechanics and the story work together. So there's lots of side content, but all of the side content involves people you care about and things you care about. So you can basically say, like, how deep do I want to go with this side character and like learn about their backstory and learn more about the world that, you know, like from their point of view and stuff. And so if you don't engage with that, you just get a shallower version of the world building. But if you do engage with it, you get a much deeper version of the world building and from like interesting different points of view, because it's the whole game is Game of Thrones, right? It's Game of Thrones with Final Fantasy like painted over the top. So there's all these different factions and empires and kingdoms and duchies and like how do they interact and what are their families doing and how does magic work in that kingdom versus over here. So the different points of view are super important. But then the thing they did that is really clutch if you're a person who's like on the fence with super story heavy games is almost all of the side quests lead to something that is mechanically beneficial. So like this one guy who's like you're in an area that's like it's hard to grow food, and so this guy is like, hey, I need like this plant because that will like help us grow food better, right? So you go out and you stab the bad guys and then you get the plant because it was in a dangerous area and you bring it back to him, and you would expect him to just be like, oh, thanks, I got the plant and now we can grow more food.
XP and gold.
Yeah, and it wouldn't really change anything. But what he instead says is, I should have told you this up front, but this is actually also really useful in medicines. And so if you give me a minute, I can make an additive that will make all of your potions just work better. And so now for the rest of the game, whenever you use a potion, it's just a little bit more effective. And then later there's like, because most of the quests are like in chains, right? So it's like you do like part 1 and then later you do part 2. And then after more story stuff, you can do part 3. And so later he's like, oh, hey, the medicines are like actually not powerful enough for the amount of like wounded people we're dealing with because of like political strife. So will you help me like go get this, you know, the liver of a griffin or whatever? And you're like, now you as the player know, like, well, the last time I helped this guy with something, like I got something out of it, right? And so you go and you bring him the liver of a griffin, and now your potions are like a little bit better, right? And like everything, like that is how you unlock better equipment. That is how you unlock the ability to carry more potions and stuff. Like they're all tied to narrative things. There's very, very few quests where it's like narrative just for the sake of narrative. And they're usually very short and like really consumable and skippable. But you don't want to skip them because sometimes that unlocks the other later thing that will get you the mechanical advantage. So like the way they wove, we have a lot of story to tell. This is basically Game of Thrones, but it's a video game, so you need some kind of mechanical reward. It's just really, really tight. And for me, as a longtime fan of Final Fantasy, the thing that I actually find the most hilarious is this game exists because Final Fantasy 15 was not what they wanted Final Fantasy 15 to be. I don't know that, but here's my argument.
Wasn't Final Fantasy 15 the one where like it was a bunch of like
the boy band
dudes and like what?
The boy band?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. One of our mutual friends was like, dude, you got to play this. And at one point, like when I was over at their house, they sat me down and was like, play this for like 2 hours. And I was like, I can't find a part of me that gives a crap about this. You know?
Nope. Yeah. So here's the thing. You boot up Final Fantasy 15 and it literally says white text against a black screen, something to the effect of a Final Fantasy for new fans and old fans alike. And it's like, I don't know, man. If you have a sign out in front of your restaurant that says like best burgers in town, the odds that they are the best burgers in town is not great, because otherwise the customers would be saying you should go eat there. They have the best burgers in town.
Yeah, that's why decent pizza in Tallahassee was so popular, because it was actually very good pizza.
Yeah, it was pretty good pizza, but they were humble about it.
Yeah, they were like, it's decent pizza. And then you're like, hey, don't, you know, this is pretty good pizza. But if they're like best pizza ever, you'd be like, I don't know, this pizza's just pretty good.
Yeah, it's decent.
Yeah.
So Final Fantasy 15 wanted to be like the entry point in, right? Like, oh, you've never played Final Fantasy before? Well, here's a modern one that still does all the Final Fantasy stuff, but it has like modern systems and modern graphics and modern everything, right? And that game actually replaced Final Fantasy VIII as the Final Fantasy I couldn't finish, right?
Wow.
I got a few hours into it and I was just like, I just can't. I don't care about this. I don't care about this world. I don't care about these characters. I don't care about any of this, because all of the interesting parts are locked behind so many layers of BS, right? And finally, because I was playing it on stream and a couple of people were just like, you don't have to do this. You don't have to do this.
Yeah.
It's okay. Just don't play it. And I was like, they're right. And so I literally uninstalled it on stream. I was just like, I'm uninstalling this game right now as my like way of putting my foot down. So Final Fantasy 16 is on the face of it, I think a good game. It is super narrative heavy. Like if you don't like story heavy games, you would not enjoy this game. It just has a ton of story, but the action is action, right? It's not turn-based. It's 100% live action. So it's more like the modern God of War, right? It's big action set piece, narrative, big action set piece, narrative. So if you like modern God of War, you might actually like this game. And the reason I say it's a good in for people who are like actually new to Final Fantasy as like a fandom series thing is there's all these little things that are throwbacks that don't hurt you if you don't know what it's a throwback to, right? Oh, this guy Sid is like an important character. Sid has also been in literally every single Final Fantasy, and he's always an important character. But if you don't know that, it doesn't hurt anything because they tell you everything you need to know about this guy to know why he's important, right? Airships are a thing that exist, and sometimes they kind of look like this, just like they did in the classic Final Fantasy. But if you don't know that, it doesn't hurt anything, right? Like all these little moments, including super subtle things. Like there's this big major scene where the characters are talking about like this thing they got to go do and why it's important. And they're like galvanized and they're focused now. And like, so there's all these things we could do, but now like we're starting to get focused on like what's most important and what the game's really going to be about. And underneath that is the overture from the original Final Fantasy, the right, and it's like it's like kind of quiet and soft in the background, and like there's other instruments going on to like make it fit with the rest of the music, and I was just like, oh, even the composer was like, hey, just so you know, if you're going to get into Final Fantasy, this is a piece of music you're going to hear a lot, right? So it's just like all throughout, there's just all these like amazing little things, and then you can add on top of that, like this is doing stuff that like no other Final Fantasy has really done, like men showing feelings. Like men cry in this game. They cry over other men, right? Like romantic interests as well as like platonic interests. I was like, oh, there's like modern progressive representations of relationships as well as like, you know, manly men with big swords, like doing manly men with big swords things. So like, it's just, I thought it was just honestly like an incredibly solid game. And I'm kind of glad I played it over like 6 months because I got to like really savor it. If I put 50 hours into it in a single weekend, I don't know if it would have felt the same. So should you, George, play it? Maybe. Like you you liked God of War. You might actually enjoy this game, but it is a lot of story.
Yeah, and unfortunately, right now my backlog of games is getting very long. As is my backlog of like TV and movies to watch is getting very long because all I've been doing is playing Baldur's Gate. So if you're asking what am I playing and why should you care, I basically copy and paste everything you just said, but replace Final Fantasy 16 with Baldur's Gate. You know,
Baldur's Gate 3, which Baldur's everybody Gate. Knows that's what you mean. But I do love that like that game has now so supplanted everything in the Baldur's Gate universe that it's just being shortened to Baldur's Gate.
Well, I mean, in the same way that when you just referred to me, you didn't say God of War 4, you said God of War, right?
Right.
Yeah. So,
Doom 2016 did this. There was another big RPG. Oh, Fallout did this, right? Like
Fallout 3.
Nobody's like, oh, Fallout 3. And it's like Fallout. You mean Fallout? And it's like, no, I mean Fallout 3. But we both know I mean Fallout.
Yeah, when somebody says Fallout, they probably don't mean Fallout 1. You know? Yeah, absolutely. So so for Final Fantasy 16, maybe it sounds like something that might be interesting and good to try, but man, I'm just staring down the barrel of like so many other like experiences, and especially because
we live in a time of great riches.
Yeah, right. It's just kind of like, oh, you should try this food. It's like, but I'm eating this other food that's so delicious, you know. My cup runneth over. And interestingly, Megan and I finished our first run of Baldur's Gate this weekend.
Hey,
so
did you
yay
open Baldur's Gate? I don't actually know what the objective is.
We did go through, actually, interestingly, I don't know what happens, but we never actually went through Baldur's Gate, you know, like, I know, right?
False
one thing. We did beat the big bad. I'm debating on how much, you know, spoilery stuff I want to throw in there, but
I do plan to play it, so don't ruin too much for me.
Yeah. So basically, long story short, the big bad that you're fighting turns out to be a super big bad, you know, and you go and you fight it. interestingly, so Megan and I were playing together, and so it's 2-player couch co-op. And at one point, I was like trying to pull our party together, and Megan didn't realize I was trying to do that, and so she just soldiered ahead. And I was playing the paladin, and she's playing the rogue, right? Yeah, and so she then got like all of these cutscenes that would have been super clutch if my character had been doing it, because I had all of the right stats to do that stuff.
Because there's like persuasion or like right.
Yes, and on top of that, like there's a thing that the game lets you do where it says, "Hey, there's this thing you can do that will give you a strong mechanical benefit, but a minor aesthetic setback. Like your character will look different, right?" And Megan was like, "I don't want to look like that," and I was just like, "Well, I want the power, right?" So me and the 2 allies that we had all had this power, and she did not. So one of the things that it gives you, amongst other things, is the ability to fly. So you can cover like grand distances. You know,
famously incredibly broken in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes. So, you know, we're flying everywhere, and then Megan the rogue is just like huffing it on foot, like trying desperately to keep up. And I'm like, yeah, be at least a dozen or so times I'd be like, this is one of those times where it'd be really nice if your character could fly, but no, we'll work around it.
She was Videl, right? The rest of the Z Force is flying, and she's like, come back.
Please. So there's that, but one of the other benefits it gives you is it gives you expertise in a number of different, like, you know, categories of skill. So yeah, my character was very, very good. I think like at the end they had a +11 to persuasion or something like that, and she had a +2. You know, so like it was just like, hey, make this save, and I'm like, well, I make that save at a +6, but go ahead, you know. And so
you got this.
Yeah, and then the first one's DC was like 20, and it was like, okay, try again. DC was 25. It was like, okay, try again at a DC of 30, and I'm like, you're rolling for 20s at this point, man. So everything went really, really sideways, but like also we made some narrative choices that I was like, this isn't the narrative choice I would probably make, but I know that Megan is doing her own playthrough. I'm like, I know you will pick the other thing, so like this makes the most sense because my love interest wanted this thing, and I was like, I don't really care about this, but she feels passionately about it, so you know, like, let's do the thing. So eventually we fought the big bad, won the day, as it were. And yeah, and the thing though that I think that Baldur's Gate did particularly well is I turned to Megan, I was like, you want to do another playthrough? And she was like, yeah, let's do it, you know. So
yes, that was the exact feeling I had when I finished Final Fantasy 16, because I was like, oh, all these earlier cutscenes have now been contextualized with this new information, and now I kind of want to go back and hear like, oh, when this person said this, were they misinformed? Were they actually holding something back? Like, what is, you know, I want the second reading, essentially.
Right. Well, and actually, I think for this one is the reason why I want to go back is I think that unlike in Mass Effect 3, like the choices, I think, really matter. And I'm really interested in how much they do, because we made a couple of choices to where things went in a certain direction. I'm like, I really wonder what happens if you make the opposite choice. Like, what happens if you side with this person? Like, one of the things that happened, that this isn't a huge spoiler, is that you meet within Act 1, you meet a guy called Raphael, and he is a devil, you know, like capital D, devil lord, right? You know, and so he introduces himself and he's like, hey, you should side with me. And that like kind of like very like, you know, overly loquacious, very like, I'm the devil, I've got all the time in the world, you should side with me because I'm awesome, right? And then in Act 3, he kind of says like why he wants you to side with him and specifically what he wants from you, you know? So instead of side either, because you can just straight up ignore him, you can just not do any of that stuff, right? But we didn't ignore him, also didn't side with him, instead figured out where his house was and robbed him. Turns out that kind of pisses him off. So yeah.
I'm shocked.
But it was funny because so as we were running back to like, because his house is in hell, right? So there's a portal, you know, that we're all running back to. We're in turn-based combat, right? They did a great job building it. So we're all running back, and we get to the portal, and the first person that gets there, I hit X to like make them leave. And he goes, nah, you have to have your whole party here. And I was like, Raphael's gonna catch us. And Megan's like, how do you know? I'm like, because otherwise they just let us leave. Like, we're all gonna. It was just like Roger, where it's like, this is you, isn't it, Roger? We're gonna get there, and it's gonna be you. It's like we're all gonna get there. And then there's going to be a cutscene. But the funny thing is that, like, so you meet this guy through a number of different interactions, right? And every time he's just very calm, and I'm Raphael, and I'm very suave. But this time he's just like, you have no idea how awesome this could have been. And instead, I gave you everything. And you decided to come into my house and steal my stuff. And I'm like, oh, he's pretty mad. Like, he is no longer calm, controlled, and collected. So putting a pin in that, one other minor story that, again, like, I'm just interested in how it would play out differently, is at one point he says, like, hey, listen, I had a run-in with, like, this other devil a few years back, and I kind of did not a nice thing to him, and he's where you're going. So be aware, he's pretty powerful. Like, try to avoid him if possible, right? And you can't really avoid him, or not to the best of my knowledge. So you go in there, and the devil says, like, oh, Raphael fooled me with a contract. And he, like, recites the contract, which is basically, like, anybody who has heard the contract, like, has to be killed or something like that, right? And so he's like, and I've killed all of these justiciars, but I'm still stuck in here. And if you make a save, it says, like, there's something odd about the exact phrasing of the contract. There's a trick to it, right? And so you can say, hey, the problem is your minions have heard the contract. You got to kill your minions, dude. And so all of the evil minions kill themselves, right? So, and I'm playing the paladin, and Megan's sitting there beside me. So I make this, persuasion check, and he goes like, minions, kill yourselves. And so they all die, right? And he goes like, I'm still here. You were wrong. It's like, whoa, wait. Your displacer beast has also heard it. You got to kill your displacer beast too. And he goes like, fine. And then, because I made the check again, kills the displacer beast. And he goes like, I'm still here. It's like, up. You've heard it. You should kill yourself. And he's like, what? And it's like, yeah, but then you'll just resurrect an Avernus, like, free of charge, And so then he's like, you better be right about this. And then kills himself, right? So you can get through that whole thing with no combat, just talking a devil into... And so I did that. I turned to Megan. I'm like, I am so proud of what's happened today. Because I'm like, hey, have you considered that you should also kill yourself? So I say all of that to say then Raphael's like, like, you're the worst, like in the Act 3. And all of a sudden, that devil shows back up. I was like, oh no, I thought I had dealt with you. And he's like, yeah, so Raphael and I get along now because we both have decided that you're a prick. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of going sideways, gang.
I don't even know why we come to hell anymore.
So anyways, long story short, killed, eventually was able to kill Raphael. But right when it started, the battle started, like, everybody beat us in initiative, and they're all, like, wailing on us. And Megan said, like, I don't know if this is a thing we can win. I'm like, honestly, me either, man. This is going really far south. But then, like, a couple of rolls went in our way. More specifically, as I cast Hold Monster on Raphael, and it worked for a round. So I just, like, took him out of it for a round. I was like, oh, thank God. All right. And then, because when he came back, he cast some kind of spell that, like, almost killed, like, half of the people. I'm like, well, thank God he wasn't doing that every round. So, anyways, I say all that to say that I'm curious, like, because in another one of my playthroughs, I couldn't convince that devil to kill himself. So, like, if he's dead, does that just make that combat way easier? Is there, like, a narrative difference? Like, what happens? And there's a whole bunch of places like that where I'm like, if I didn't do this, then this thing that happened can't happen. What happens here if this other thing didn't happen? So I'm interested in how all of that plays out.
Well, I think this is a place where the player's feelings toward video games, I think, matters a lot. And here's why I say that. God of War, Final Fantasy 16, Fallout, the newer Fallouts, like, they may have some choices, but they don't really matter, right?
Right.
Which means on a subsequent playthrough, you are not going to see where else the story could have gone, right? And in a game like God of War and Final Fantasy 16, they're like, nah, this is the story we're telling. Like, we don't...
Right.
Kratos doesn't decide to give up adventuring and open up a bakery. Like, that's not a thing. We're never going to present you with that choice as if you could decide to abandon your son and go open up a bakery. Like, that's just... We're not going to pretend that could happen, right? Fallout, all of the Fallouts that I've played, like, they all kind of try to pretend that you could have, like, a totally different story. And they've actually gotten worse about that as the games have gone on. Like, Fallout 1 has the exact moment you were just talking about where you can, like, convince a guy to kill himself, except it's the last boss.
Nice.
The final boss of Fallout 1 is, like, a brain monster mutant, like, hooked up to a computer who, like, basically controls everything. And you can just tell him, like, man, you should just kill yourself. And you can get him to do it, but you can also hack the machine and blow everything up, or you can just fight him in combat and he has, like, robots and turrets or whatever. And so, like, you can win the game basically using all the different major skills, right? So like there is it doesn't change that ultimately you get to that guy, but like how you choose to address that problem is very, very flexible. In a game like Baldur's Gate 3, and to some extent like other games that are trying to be digital D&D, if you play tabletop D&D, you're used to literally anything could happen, right? And to the point where literally anything can happen in like a Willy Wonka, Alice in Wonderland, this isn't fun, this is just annoying kind of way, right? Where it's like, oh, my DM decided they didn't like what we were doing, and so then dragons just appeared. And it's like, yeah, but the video game's probably not going to do that. So I wonder how you would feel if you went back through and you started making really different choices and it wasn't dramatically changing like the flow of the overall story. Like, does that shatter the glass for you? Do you still find that enjoyable because it like paints it in a different light? Like it's still the same object, but I'm looking at it from a different angle and the light bulb is a different color. So like it's still a different experience, even if it's similar in some ways. Like how different do you need it to be to feel like, yeah, it was super different?
So I think that for me, it matters. The answer to that question matters on how much is the game leveraging that as its core selling point, right? So I think that in Baldur's Gate, I would be entirely happy if it was a more, like the ending was more linear, because the game is so enjoyable to play. I mean, like I just finished it and collectively have 150 hours in it because I started playing and then like started playing another campaign and then started doing like, and Megan was playing hers. And so like, all said and done, have 150 hours sunk into this thing before like the very first time I actually finished it, because the game is just straight up fun to play. So now I'm kind of going back to just see like, okay, how much of this was illusion of choice and how much of it was actual choice, for sheer curiosity to have the answer to that question. Like, I don't think that I would be, if it turns out that, siding with this other person, like I'm really curious. And I want to just like say, because it's not long, but like there's at one point, do you know who Vlaakith is?
No, but that sounds like a villain name.
She's a D&D. She's actually a D&D character. Yeah, but she's like the leader of the Githyanki, right? At one point she says, go kill a person. And then you go to the person who's ostensibly been helping you and are like, look, man, I'm not going to kill you. Like, we should talk, right? And eventually you're like, I decided to go unseat Vlaakith from power, right? Because she kind of sucks. But you can absolutely be like, yeah, sure. And then go kill that person, That's an option. So I'm like, what happens if you do that? Like, do you then like, because not having that person plays a strong role like in my story later on in the game. So it's like, if they're just gone, like how do you fill that in? Or does it give you the choice to pick, but they don't actually die, and then it kind of like, so I'm really just curious, because if they do have the amount of choice that they've given the illusion of, this game is beyond massive, because then ostensibly you could probably do 10 playthroughs and get 10 very meaningful, satisfactory different endings for each one. And like I said, like one playthrough probably honestly took me about 60 hours. So that means that this game has like 600 hours before you're repeating any real content. So it's like, that's huge, and I'd be like really interested in how they were able to cleverly do that, because I think that could make me a better DM, and like, how did you build this much game in that amount of time,
Where'd all this game come from?
But that actually leads me nicely to the other thing I've been playing a ton of is D&D. I am currently DMing 3 different campaigns.
I love, if somehow someone didn't know that Baldur's Gate is built entirely on top of the 5e rule set, like the fact that you just acted like you segued to a different game as opposed to a different medium of the same game.
That was the awesome thing, because either people know and they're like, oh, I get it, or they're like, oh, one of those crazy non sequiturs they always do. Anyways, but yeah, so Dungeons and Dragons. I'm currently DMing 3 different tables, and I'm kind of guest starring in another adventure. And the one I'm guest starring in, that DM was like, hey, I'm trying this new thing called Above VTT, which is a virtual tabletop, right? And so I played it, and I was like, all other virtual tabletops are dead to me. I believe physical tabletops may be dead to me, as in I might be using this for the game that I actually have in person. I was like, this is the wave of the future, right?
So this is how I know you're a good scientist, right? Because I remember not that long ago talking to you about like VTTs and like using some digital tools, and you were like, nah, man, I like having a book. I like the convenience of pen and paper. And then I exposed you to Owlbear, And then not that long later, you were like, I'm thinking about buying an entire touchscreen to lay on the table to use to play with Owlbear. And now that you have even broken out and you're like experimenting with other VTTs, like when presented with compelling new information, you are willing to change your point of view like a scientist.
Yay! Yeah, I really do think that, like, I'm not saying that the Borg were the good guys, but I'm saying that they had some good ideas, right? Like, we will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own, man. Like somebody had a good idea. You're like, oh, I'm going to do that now. So above VTT, it's nice because it's just an extension that you add onto your computer, but then you access it and work with it through D&D Beyond, So that's kind of clutch. It does a bunch of stuff that like other tabletops can do. It tracks initiative. It does all of these like different kind of conveniences. The nice thing is because the D&D Beyond character is integrated into it, you can just click on the stuff on your character and it'll roll everything for you digitally, which was already nice because the one time that I've run it so far is that somebody was like, I rolled a 15 and that passed the check. But then when I looked, they rolled a 2 plus 13. And I was like, oh, I need to kludge some of these checks on the fly because you guys can't fail them. Like I didn't realize that you had people that had skills that high, So that was just a nice thing for me to be able to mod pretty quickly on the fly. It naturally does a lot of other nice things, which is like as you decrease the hit points of monsters, it naturally decreases their aura from green to red. So people aren't constantly asking me, how does that thing look? You're like, it looks about that good. But you can also like turn on and off how many, like it will display how many hit points it has. You can turn that on and off. It can display its armor class. It can display tons of the name. You can make it so that way the name is only there when it hovers over it. You can make it so that way the name is always displayed, which was nice because and there's a bunch of other like partnered content that they do. One of them that is really nice because when you type in commoner to like place icons, right, is they have like 50 different commoners, but every time you place it, it just randomly picks the commoner unless you pick it, know?
Yeah, that's nice. Because for the most part, they are generic random commoner.
Right, yeah. So you just like, and at one point, and it's great because as a DM, it creates an emergent DMing experience because at one point I was populating a bar and it was like random, male human, female elf, half orc or orc, right? Like orc. So I put, putting them all at different tables. And then it just randomly gave me another of the exact same orc. So I put it at the same table with the other orc. And then it gave me a third one. So I was like, you know what? Maybe there's something going on with these orcs now. And I wrote like a little mini thing of like why there's just a table of these 3 orcs in this small, like humanoid mostly town, And I was just like, all right, I wouldn't have done that otherwise, right?
And I do love how like gentle of a nudge it takes for someone to like lean into like, well, but why are these 3 orcs there? Like it's the middle of the day in a mostly human town. They don't seem like they're ashamed to be there. They're eating, they're drinking. Like what's the deal with these 3 orcs? And then before you know it, somebody at the table is like, George, whose turn is it? Like, cause they're in the middle of like super story heavy combat and you're just writing like your 10th page of notes about these 3 orcs.
Well, and the nice thing too is that so like for example, one of the things I did just again trying out was so I built like because it's a virtual tabletop, I'm like, okay, I'm going to now make it so that way there are very, very few scenes that are theater of the mind. Like if you're in a bar, I'm going to build the bar, right? So build the bar, and then I was like, okay. And so the nice thing is that most of the patrons are commoners, and when you hover over them, it says commoner. But I normally try to have 2 to 4 like NPCs in each area, and then one of them is like the thing that has the thing that you need to do. So eventually I like push them in that direction, but I just told everybody if they have a name, they're worth talking to. If it just says commoner, I can work with you, but like it's plumbing a shallow well. We might do something fun, like something fun might come out of it because they may figure out why the orcs are all there, and then all of a sudden like they're off doing a side thing where they're helping some orcs, like stop a cave, because maybe that's how they got to the cave, not because the quest giver told them to go to the cave, but because the orcs wanted to go there for some reason, right? And that's fun. It's just improv comedy, but with D&D, right? But one of the other things I did this time was I said to ChatGPT is I just said, hey, generate me 5 commoners in D&D, 5th edition with, I said, with a age, race, description, wants and needs, secret and obstacle, and a check that will, a ability check that will give them a different additional information. And ChatGPT did that like gangbusters. It was, I basically then just took the icon in above VTT, right-clicked, said add note, and just wholesale copied and pasted what ChatGPT put in there. And so then the nice thing for me is that as I'm playing, I know like the quest giver and like where they kind of need to go next. But they were like, I go talk to this person. I'm like kind of like I do a quick read. I'm like, yeah, so this is what they're saying. And then so now it's even more fun for me, the DM, because I'm doing this improv. Like I'm basically doing an improv scene where I've improv the character, they're playing their character, and it's like so like I mean at one point one of them was a Goliath, and the athletics check that they could make was to find out that the Goliath barbarian used to be a master arm wrestler. And so they arm wrestled with him, and because of that, he let them know that hey, the bar is actually upside down in their finances, and so they gave him 500 gold to keep the bar solvent for another year, and but they were like, but you got to change the name of the bar to this, and so they paid 500 gold, made their mark on the town, and they were all having fun, and I was like, this is pretty neat. So I say all of that to say that the thing that is my kind of like subject is so above ETT versus Owlbear versus TTRPG gaming. The interface. So one of the things that the game does really, above VTT does very well, and I feel better than Owlbear, or at least I think there's an extension you can download into Owlbear to make it do this well, is Fog of War. So what above VTT does is it lets you set up walls and lighting conditions, So basically is that if, and doors and stuff. So they're all the characters see are the little door icons, and then they click on it, and then that will then give them line of sight, right?
Yeah, but if there's a line of sight based on walls. Whereas
it's line of sight based off,
as far as I know, in Owlbear, you are like censoring the map, which means if you want it censored in a way that's meaningful, like you have to draw out those neutral spaces. Because I remember there was a couple times when we were playing and I was using Owlbear, and I was just like, I didn't block this out to like a low enough degree of precision. So like you, the players, can now see this whole room, and I'm just trusting you, the characters, to like understand what your line of sight is. And because it's a lot of work to set it up manually.
Right. Yeah. So this is nice because you just set up the walls, and then the nice thing is, so I kind of did it where I was like, okay, you guys are on a pirate ship, right? And I just set up all the walls. I'm like, explore the pirate ship. So a bunch of people were like, two of them were just like, hey, we're going to get drunk with the pirates. So they went into the back room, got drunk with some pirates, right? But one of the guys was like, I'm going to like sneak around, because he's with the rogue, right? He's like, I'm going to sneak around and explore, right? And I was like, all right, cool. And so, he goes to like the lowest deck, and so his icon just disappears. And then he goes, oh, whoa. And everybody's like, whoa, what's going on? I'm like, they can't hear you. You're 2 decks down from where they're at. And he goes, nothing. Because there were a bunch of griffins tied up down there. And he was like, I opened this door. Whoa, what's that? And I'm just like, it looks like this. And I just show him the picture of it. And he goes, or because it's the icon, right? So I was just like, it looks like the icon. Like you can see what you can see. And he goes, okay. And he goes into this other area, and there was a treasure chest in that area. And he goes, what can I do with this treasure chest? I'm like, well, I mean, you don't see anyone else around. And he goes, can I pick it? Or can I open it? And I was like, it's locked. He goes, pick the lock. I was like, yep, sure. And then I just had a note on the treasure chest icon of what was in there. I just because you can whisper, right? So I just sent to just him in the chat. I was like, this is what's in there. And he goes, oh my God. I was like, yeah, it's a lot of stuff in there, And so they're like, what is he up to? I'm like, don't worry about that. Anyways, you guys were doing that. What are you up to? And so then they get through like the next encounter, right? And then, they get basically to a town where they can breathe for a second. Because at one point somebody said like, hey, what's going on with that? I'm like, you're in the middle of combat. You don't have the time to disseminate that information. And so they get to a place, and the guy goes, okay, so first of all, everybody gets 10,000 gold. And they're like, what? And he's like, yeah, there was a lot of gold in that chest. And also there was a +3 Rod of the Pact Keeper. So who wants it? Do you want that? And they're like, yeah. And it's like, and also this other huge magical item. And they're like, all right, cool, I'll take that. And he's like, all right, cool, great on you, gang. And I noticed that there was one item missing from that list of things that he told everyone about.
This manifest seems to be incomplete, but you know what? I'm going to just let you guys all suss that out.
Yeah, exactly. Because I was just in my mind, I was like, ooh, that carpet of flying didn't happen to show up on the list. That's all right. He knows it. He's got it written down, whatever.
And that's an item that's going to lead to a fun future reveal, right? It might be 30 seconds later. It might be 30 sessions later. But like eventually when someone's like, carpet, and then they flying Nimbus out of the scene or into some scene.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just kind of like, so that type of emergent gameplay would not have been possible on like a normal table unless I was like writing on a note. But at least other people would know that he found a treasure chest. Even if I were to write on the note, like, hey, this is what's in it, and slide it to him, right? They would have known, like, oh, okay, you found a treasure chest. Was that really everything that was in there? But then it was like this great emergent thing, because none of the other players would have known that he found a treasure chest, They just knew that he was below decks doing stuff. One of the other, though, things that I did that was pretty interesting was, so they have a bunch of pre-made maps, like hundreds of them, you know? So I was just like, and so the way I typically write is I'm like, I need a thing that bridges to this next thing, right? And I was like, so they had done combat, then they had been in a town. So I'm like, I need to have some type of like combat mechanics thing because D&D is the 3 pillars. So I'm like, I need some of this pillar here. So I found like this, like what looks just like a temple where it's 10 feet and then stairs up and then the next 10 feet and it looks like what are those types of pyramids called? You know what I'm talking about? It's got like a particular name. It's like a pyramid, but it's like I feel like it's
like an Aztec style with the stairs.
Yeah. Anyways, it looks like an Aztec.
I'm sure there is a name for it that's not pyramid because Aztecs, not Egyptians. But I don't know.
Ziggurat, maybe. I don't know, but
yeah, I like that. That's a fun word.
Yeah, but anyways, so it looked like that, and I was just kind of like, okay, I could just do like normal combat, but I was like, no, let's do this. So I said like this giant veil of shadows that like reaches up to the sky, and what I did was I put walls on each little level, and then I put weird stuff in each area, and like so they basically had to like walk around and find the different entrances to the next level. But because of that, at one point they were like, okay, well, because they all have and the game knows or VTT knows whether or not you have dark vision or whether or not you need light. So there's
each person, like if they're all logged in separately, they're seeing their vision cone, not everybody's.
Correct. Yeah,
that's nice. That's nice.
Yeah, and you can change that. You with a click of a button, you can say everybody can see what everybody sees, but I kept this. You can only see what you can see because you can only see what you can see. So 2 of them were just like walking by, and they turned the corner and they saw an iron golem, and they were like, "Oh crap!" And I was like, "Everybody roll initiative." And so I put them all into rounds, except I kept the iron golem out of rounds because otherwise it would show them in the combat tracker what was going on. And you can also hide and unhide people in the combat tracker, which is kind of nice. So anyway, so I was just like, okay, so you go then, and then so one of the people was like, what's going on? And I was like, you have the information that you have. Make a decision. And it was one person, they were like, because they forgot, one of the people that was walking with the human ran off because they went first, right? And so Bucknell, poor Bucknell, who's the human, was like, I can't see anything. I'm like, exactly.
Yeah,
what do you
can't.
do? Yeah, you can't. You're a human in a dark area. You were relying on somebody else's sight, and now they're gone. What do you do? And he's like, well, can I light a torch? I'm like, absolutely. That's your action, though. You pull out a torch and you light it, so you can still move and do this. So he created a bunch of like fun, emergent gameplay where like one person set up off a trap that they were unaware of, and so then like they were trying to disarm this trap because they ran into an area that like they couldn't see. So when they turned the corner and saw the trap, they had already set it off, So like they were dealing with a trap while another person was dealing with an iron golem, and another person was trying to run up to kind of see what was going on. And I'm like, this. So I say all that to say that type of encounter could not happen with probably not with Alibor, but definitely not with a normal like tabletop drawing of a map, right? Because even if you trust your players to the nth degree, it is almost impossible for you to like truly divorce yourself from what you know and what you don't know when you're trying to make tactical decisions, So
that was exactly what I was just thinking about, is the real feature of a VTT is that it saves the player characters from having to pretend they do or don't know certain things, because that's super hard, right? It's not impossible, but it's incredibly hard. How many times that you've been at a table, the handful of times in your life you actually get to be the player, when the DM is like, and then, this thing comes, starts to slither around the corner, and exactly what that monster is, what its stat block is, like what spells it has, what abilities it has, what the trick is to beating it if it's got some like goofy gimmick. And there's no way to get that knowledge out of your head, right? So the DM has to trust their players to say, like, if this is a Zelda boss and, you have to shoot it with an arrow in the eye 3 times and that's the only place it's vulnerable. Like, does the character know that? And if the answer is yes, then go ahead and exercise that knowledge. But if the answer is no, please stop making tactical decisions that would only make sense if you had this like keystone piece of knowledge. But then the little things like, oh, we split up. What was so-and-so doing while I was over here? And it's like, you have no idea, right? Or what's around this corner? You don't know. Or what does this hallway look like? It's too dark, right? Like, it's having the ability to just essentially put a firewall there, and a firewall that can come down at the drop of a hat, right? If the party splits up and then you are like, oh crap, these 2 groups are going to get a ton of information while they're separated, and it's not meaningful in a way that I want to spend table time having them catch each other up, then you can just say out loud, here's all the information this party got and the information that party got. And then when you reconvene, I am just assuming you share that information. Is that a reasonable assumption? Yes. Okay, we're done. But maybe this is an opportunity for the rogue to not tell everyone they got the flying carpet, right? And you want to leave that up to the player. Do you, the player, tell the other players that this is exactly what I found and it's actually a complete list? And so, like, to me, the linchpin in that is that you can still immediately revert back to everybody knows everything and I'm trusting you to make healthy choices, but you get to make that choice. You get to decide, does everybody know everything? Could everybody actually see the whole map because it was drawn out on a piece of paper in the center of the room? Like, I feel like you could slide too far into this is now a video game with lots and lots of humans talking to each other, but there are some things that you just can't reasonably do. You just couldn't reasonably have had that experience without a whole lot of things going right? Everybody just rolling 20 after 20 after 20, like, as a player.
Right. Yeah. And that was the thing, is I feel like that's way more fun and emergent because, like, one person climbed up to, the crow's nest to, like, try to, see some stuff. Right. And then also too, one of the other neat little features that it has is that there's all of the different scenes that you've built, and there's a DM button and a player button. And so if I click whatever I click for the players, that's what they see. But I, the DM, can click on any of the scenes and see a different one. Right. So so the nice thing was that, like, they were taking a ship from point A to point B, and I knew that the next scene was that a Kraken was going to appear and destroy the ship, right? So I had the exploded ship map and, like, where everybody was going to be. So so it was just funny because, like, I was like, you hear a thud, into the ship, and then they made their check, and, like, they saw one of the tentacles, and they destroyed that tentacle, right? And they're like, all right. And I was just like, okay. You hear another, like, thud, and they see another tentacle, and they're getting geared up to beat that. I was like, okay. And then at the top of the hour, and I just hit the button, and it just said loading. And for me, I put scene number, so I'm like, scene 2, shipwreck. And somebody went, oh, that's not great. And so, like, all of a sudden, like, but from their point is, it looked like all of a sudden the map just, like, appeared and, like, the ship exploded. And I was like, that was the feeling that I wanted. And then they were like, oh, there are, like, 4 tentacles now. We can take them. And then all of a sudden, I just unhid the Kraken token. And they're like, oh no, this has gone sideways, right? And also it's nice because I can see all of their hit points. So I can be like, okay, I've been wailing on this person a lot. I need to stop hitting them. Like, let me try to hit this other person, so on and so forth. But yeah, no, it's like I said, like, I just, to your point and to the point I was kind of making. Oh, and one of the other scenes I have set up is that, like, again, this type of thing would be almost impossible to do on a traditional tabletop. I was like, this will be a fun experience. Is they go into the Underdark area, right? And they find a Myconid sprout. And the Myconid sprout says, help, I came down here I was in this area with 3 other Myconids, and we got separated and lost. Can you help me find my friends? And they're like, yes, like, but be careful. There are some Kuthrix, like, walking around, so, like, be careful. And so I just hid them around the map. And so now each of the players can move around the map and try to find the good things. And there's also, like, treasure hidden around too. So it's like, oh, behind this wall there's treasure, and behind this wall there's a Myconid, but behind this one there's a bad thing. And if they start fighting the bad things out, if they start fighting the bad things, and that will gain the attention of the other bad things, which may now ambush something else that can't see them, and so on and so forth. So I'm like, this is just, like, that, those types of experiences you can't do. And one of the other ones that is, there's a bad guy in, like, one room where I realized he has a 30-foot net bad aura. Like, his aura does bad things, right? And so you can add auras, and you can make them invisible to the players, which I went ahead and did, right? And I was like, give him a 30-foot aura. I saw it actually goes to the other side of the door that leads to him. And so I was like, so
I was just wondering if that's where you were going with it, because I was like, I could imagine players huddled around a door, like, do we hear anything? Can we pick it? And it's like, oh, you're all pressed up against the door, so you're all under the influence of, like, I hate my friends and want to stab them aura, that you don't even know there's a person on the other side of the door that could have that aura.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was the thing, is that, like, the aura, like, has a wisdom or a constitution save. So I'm just gonna be like, yeah, whoever's like, okay, I go and I open the door. It's like, awesome, give me that constitution save. It's like, well, what is it? I didn't even open the door yet. It's like, exactly. But the aura extends beyond the door, And
so, that's the kind of thing that's a benefit for the DM, because I could imagine just completely overlooking that, right? Because you're compartmentalizing to, they're in the hallway, they're in the room, they're on the stairs. And so, like, where those boundaries bleed over, like, I did this crazy thing and it made a lot of noise. And it's like, okay, how far would that noise reach? Who would have heard that noise? Like, it's hard to keep track of all that crap.
Yeah. So it's just like, again, like a bunch of different. And to me, the way I always write D&D adventures is once a person said like, well, how do you determine, like how challenging to make an encounter? And I always say, like, I start with how I want the players to feel, and then I walk backwards from there, So like the idea of, because they're supposed to be in this like dark, scary place with scary undead monsters and this one thing. So I'm like, yeah, the fact that all of a sudden they're being influenced by an aura effect that they don't even know what it is or what it does, like that's kind of cool. And one of the other interesting things about this particular dungeon that I would not have probably come up with on my own, I just pulled it up from the random series of maps, is that the map is laid out really interesting, but there are some areas that you can get to by both going through a door, but in a different area, going through there's like a waterway that kind of goes underneath it. So you can swim and get to the room like a different way by like going underneath, the water. I was like, but you know what? In my adventure, the water is going to be fetid and it's going to make you make constitution saves, right? So, but it's entirely possible. So it could be that, and you have to make an athletics check to swim in it. So maybe one of the characters is like, well, I'll swim ahead and see what's going on. And then all of a sudden they pop their head up. It's like, roll for initiative. But they could duck back down and try to leave, And then now they kind of know where that room is, but the minute they leave, it disappears. So now they kind of mentally remember about what were the dimensions of that room. Because to your point with Albert, I don't have to put the fog back, It just automatically comes back up. So like, they're like, well, I don't know, man. I feel like are we getting pretty close to that room? It's like, this might be the room, like, who knows? And that could be a thing that happens. It might not happen, like, who knows? But so yeah. So, the interface, as we always often said, like, how do you separate the controls from this? And how do you do that? It's like, you can't. And I think that if you're doing a standard TTRPG, right? Like that has some benefits and has some drawbacks, but like, I think that it's really important when you're making a game or when you're experiencing a game to realize how much the interface really does impact what types of puzzles and what types of things you can do with the game. Much like if you're making a game based off of fitting random puzzle blocks together, that might make a slightly different game than fitting a bunch of random bodies together.
The curtain falls, the music plays, the credits roll, then it all fades to black. And you're left by yourself. The fanfare is gone. There's no player two there by your side to share victories won. But as you slowly progress down the hall to your bed, a few great events leak back into your head from the time that you spent traversing the land, battling evil, fighting the darkness, just sword in hand. Your memories creeping with the edge of a smile. You realize again what you lost for a while. You're gonna think back much less on how you saved the day.